The Obama era. So I was up really, really late and I was listening to a video, and this young man was really, really angry, and he shared a lot of uh, bitterness about the Obama administration and how he felt like Obama didn't do enough for the black community. And he's not alone. There's been other um, black people who feel like more should have been done in black communities to uplift black communities, or to at least rebuild black communities in terms of economics. And there should have been more effort in terms of reparations for black people as a whole body and unit. And those are the things that I fear that are always ignored. And whenever you have these different presidents, I feel like there's someone behind them that does all of the talking, that does all of the writing, that pulls all the strings. And that these presidents, I sometimes feel like they are really, some of it is what they're saying, but not 100% of all of what their views are. They can only, I feel like they can only do only so much, especially if, and I have to say this, if they're a minority or in the minority class. And I feel like that America has a lot of racism, has a historical mark on it that isn't positive, and that is all centered around racial issues, even in politics. And that a lot of it is not only just the racial tensions that have happened in the past, and the hypocrisy and the destruction, and a lot of mass murder and a lot of mass incarceration of blacks, but also historical oppression. There's historical racism. There has been a lot of corruption, even in the legal system. And even up to now, we're still seeing that. And we're still feeling the effects. We as a black people still feel the effects of the bad odor, the bad scent of racial injustice in America. Even though people thought that Barack Obama, by him looking phenotypically like black culture, that he represented us, that we were post-racial, that, oh, everything is all hunky-dory and good. Everything is all to the good. You know, we are finally there. We've made our mark in America. Post-racial. Racism is coming to an end. And I came across an article, and I thought the article was very, very influential. So I'm going to read parts of the article. It's very lengthy, so bear with me. And I'm not, you know, sometimes I get tongue tied, but the article is The Atlantic, and it was written by a William A. Darity Jr., and it was put out on social media here uh, under politics. It's entitled How Barack Obama Failed Black Americans. The country's first black president never pursued policies bold enough to close the racial wealth gap. Let me read that again. The country's first black president never pursued policies bold enough to close the racial wealth gap. And this was by a William A. Darity Jr., and this was put out December 22nd, 2016. And so I found this article, you know, because there has been lots of sayings about, you know, income inequality in America in terms of the black culture, and there's been graphs, and there's been proof, documented proof, and that households that are black make far less, even if the head of the household is educated and has college degrees, than a white household led by uh, maybe someone that graduated from high school or didn't even graduate from high school. They make more. So there's a lot going on here in America that people are avoiding these issues, ignoring the problems that are still persistent and that have always been persistent in American culture in terms of black versus white or white versus black households in terms of income. So it goes on to read that born in 1953, I am a child of the waning years of legal segregation in the United States. My parents, on the other hand, spent about 40 years of their lives under Jim Crow. And all of my grandparents lived most of their lives under official American apartheid. At the time of Barack Obama's election to the presidency in 2008, my mother and all four of my grandparents were deceased. But my father was alive and well and absolutely thrilled to have lived to see the election of a black man as president of the United States. Usually deeply cynical about American politics and politicians, my dad could not comprehend my deep reservations about Barack Obama's leadership. Indeed, he viewed any criticism of Obama as bringing aid and comfort to white supremacists. My father hardly was alone among black Americans across all generations. The near complete unanimity of passionate black American admiration for Obama carried with it an absolute resistance of hearing any complaints about the black president. And indeed, there was much to admire: an exceptional resume, an attractive family with a black wife who, in his professional and his intellectual equally handsome and graying towards distinguished maturity, a strategically wise, moderate, progressive political position, and a place as the sometimes self-professed messianic fulfillment of civil rights movement of 1960s. For many black Americans, the ascent of Barack Obama to the presidency was equivalent to the moment of Jubilee. So a lot of black people were very happy just to even have a black president, someone who represented them as a culture from all of the things that have happened from the past up to now, or up to then during his presidency. The extraordinarily disciplined individual Barack Obama preempted the smallest hint of scandal by admitting that he smoked pot in his youth years. He even crafted a narrative of a rise from adversity, from growing up successfully by efforts of a single parent despite a missing father, albeit a white single mother with a PhD, whose parents were affluent residents of Hawaii. With every drop of respectability in place, his somewhat icy intellect, coupled with his enthusiasm for basketball and for black music across the half a century of styles, he was an inordinately appealing candidate with an ideal combination of cool and rationale. For many white Americans, his election confirmed their belief that American racism is a thing of the past. But the underrepresented or underemphasized dimension of each of Obama's campaigns, a dimension patently relevant to the most recent presidential election. He only received a majority of votes among whites who cast ballots. In fact, he would have swept away in a landslide had he only whites been the voters. In 2008, 55% of white voters cast their ballots for John McCain. In 2012, 59% of white voters cast the ballot for Mitt Romney. Leaders who look like you do not necessarily act in the ways that benefit you. Nevertheless, some of those white voters who did not vote for him took his 8 years as president as a license to assert that the country is post-racial, even while attacking him with both a veil and overt racial slurs. But racism is organic to American life, as we know, of course, in hindsight, and it sits at the core of the persistence of racial economic inequality. In his fascinating profile of Obama, Ta-Nehisi quotes, "To the mark of a systematic engineer to place one on top of the other, to place white over black. He offers some examples. The facts that blacks with a college degree have an unemployment rate almost as high as white high school graduates. Okay? That completion of a college education leads blacks to carry twice the level of student loan debt than whites 4 years after the degree. The blacks experience a significantly higher default rate on their loans, that black households have 1/7 of the wealth of white households, and that black families with 100,000 or more in income reside in more disadvantaged neighborhoods than white families that make less than 30,000 a year. Sadly, these actually are softer illustrations of the mark of the system than findings that have emerged from research I have done with Derek Hamilton and Ann Price and other members of what is called, it's an abbreviated NASCC research team, which is National Asset Scorecard for Communities of Color research team. We find a much higher discrepancy between black and white wealth than the gap that Coates reports. Okay, so it's actually worse than what they reported earlier on. Blacks with some college education actually have higher unemployment rates than whites who have never finished high school, and that's very scary, and that's what's true today. At each level of education, the black rate of unemployment is twice as high as white rate. Moreover, the relative economic position on virtually all indicators, including the racial unemployment rate gap, has not improved since the passage of Civil Rights Act of 1964. Estimates generate from the 2013 round Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances indicates that black households have 1/13 of the wealth of white households at the median. We have concluded that the average black household would have to save 100% of its income for 3 consecutive years to close a wealth gap. The key source of the black-white wealth gap is intergenerational effects of transfers of resources. White parents have far greater resources to give their children via gifts and inheritances. Let's look at that. Most of your white people who are living decent, nice colleges, nice houses, nice homes, retirement, sitting pretty, not worried about the Trump presidency, inheritances, okay? Gifts and inheritances from their parents. It's passed down generation to generation. So those people that say, oh, I'm not a racist, or oh, I didn't enslave black people, or I worked hard for what I have, just pull up your bootstraps, okay? Gifts and inheritances from your parents, just like Donald Trump, okay? So so with that being said, let me go on. So that the typical white young adult starts their working lives with a much greater initial net worth than the typical black young adult. These intergenerational effects are blatantly meritocratic, okay? Indeed, the history of black wealth deprivation, from the failure to provide ex-slaves with 40 acres and a mule, to the violent destruction of black property in white riots, to the seizure and the expropriation of black-owned land, to the impact of racially restrictive covenants on home ownership, to the discriminatory application of policies like the GI Bill and the FHA loans that were given to white people. Okay, that's your affirmative action. Created the foundation for what is now what blacks are suffering now, perpetual racial wealth gap. Blacks working full-time have lower levels of wealth than whites who are unemployed. Blacks in the third quintile of the income distribution have less wealth or a lower net worth than whites in the lowest quintile. even more damning for any presumption that America is free of racism is our finding that black households whose heads have college degrees, 10,000 less in net worth than white households heads who have never finished high school. As we point out in our report, okay, if you want to look at the report, it's umbrellas. It's entitled Umbrellas Don't Make It Rain. Okay? Which is a good saying. So I can kind of get what that whole thing's going to be about. Umbrellas don't make it rain. Studying hard and working hard, in other words, this goes on to express that. Studying hard and working hard does not enable blacks to eliminate the racial wealth gap. Pulling up your bootstraps, if you're not given any boots, is not going to help you eliminate the racial wealth gap. I'm adding that in there. Ad-libbing. Doing the right thing is far from enough, okay? I had a queasy feeling about Barack Obama's candidacy from the moment I heard his 2004 Democratic National Convention speech that lifted him to a national prominence. A speech that Coates summarizes in a profile. Towards the end of the speech, Obama observed that black families in urban centers realize that government alone can't teach our kids to learn, that children can't achieve unless we raise the expectation and turn off the television sets, eradicate the slander that says black youth with a book is acting white, and acting white, the label, a myth that will not die. It just seems to always reverberate, even with some black conservative or semi-conservatives, argues that low school performance for black students is a product of culturally based black opposition to high academic achievement. I long have been baffled by the tenacious hold this argument has on American imagination. After all, black families have fought for education for their children against insurmountable odds from slavery times. White students who label their high achievers, or label their high achievers, geeks and nerds, have no less a degree of anti-intellectualism. In fact, they may have a higher degree of anti-intellectualism, since black students from the families with a given level of parental income or education get more years of schooling and more credentials than white students from families with comparable socioeconomic status. In our research of NASCC project, we discovered that black parents who provide some financial support for their children's higher education have 1/3 of the wealth than white parents who provide no financial support for their children's higher education. Black culture, if anything, has been ferociously supportive of education, which is true. So you see here, poverty is not an accident like slavery and apartheid is man-made and can be removed by the actions of human beings, which is so true, by Nelson Mandela. So it goes on to say, I'm going to skip all the way down. It says, the acting white label of the symptomatic of a more generational perspective, a perspective that argues that an important factor explaining racial economic disparities is self-defeating or dysfunctional behavior on the part of blacks themselves. And Barack Obama continuously has trafficked in this perspective. Of course, there are some black folks who engage in habits that undermine their potential accomplishment, but there are also other nationalities and white folks who engage in habits that undermine the potential accomplishments as well. Okay, so I'm gonna switch over here. If you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. I thought that was interesting by Malcolm X. Okay, now I'm gonna jump this article, okay, and go all the way down to what really is bothersome. What's always being talked about is, if black reparations is the right thing to do, then we should work to make it happen, no matter how long the odds. But why does the president believe it is impossible? He says it is hard to think of any society in human history in which a majority of population has said that it is a consequence of historic wrongs. We are now going to take a big chunk of the nation's resources over a long period of time and make it right. The U.S. has taken a small chunk of the nation's resources over a short period of time to make right World War II incarceration of Japanese Americans. Malaysia's new economic policy has taken a large chunk of the nation's resources over a long period of time to correct the inferior position of the native Malays. However, the native Malays are a numerical majority in their country who also are the recipients of the wealth redistribution program conducted there. Okay? There is no doubt that the political obstacles of congressional approval of black reparations are significant, but 1820 the U.S. one might not have been able to conceive that American slavery would ever come to an end, but there were some who advocated abolition. In 1950, South Africa, one might have never been able to imagine that apartheid would ever end or come to an end, but there were activists who already had begun to oppose the system. If black reparations is the right thing to do, then I know in depth of my soul that it is, then we should work hard or work to make it happen, no matter how long the odds. We should not bow to at an altar of presumed political expediency. After all, it may be the case that the president simply is wrong about the impossibility of making reparations happen. His deference to achieving the better over determining to achieve the best may be a mistake. There are times when the effort to get the better, the marginal change that appears to be an improvement, is so exhausting that its accomplishment becomes a barrier to getting to the best. Mark Gomez at Haas Institute at Berkeley has said time again in municipal struggles for minimum wage increases that the fight for 15 is easier than the fight for 10. And sometimes Obama's careful assessments of the political landscape are wrong. For example, he has said repeatedly that you do not win elections by telling American people that things are going wrong. But that is precisely what Donald Trump did in winning the most recent presidential campaign. Black reparations can become a legitimate policy claim if and when a majority of Americans are convinced that it is an idea with merit. As Obama's 2 elections demonstrate, it does not necessarily require a majority of white Americans to support such the program. The political change is to forge the national majority, presumably with approximately 40% of the white Americans on board. Having a black president oppose reparations does not help the cause, particularly when the black president makes the case that an important source of black disadvantage is black folks' own behavior. Okay? But black America should have paid attention to the experience of post-colonial black Africa and the Caribbean. Leaders who look like you do not necessarily act in the ways that benefit you, so be it. The struggle for reparations and for black lives and justice must and will continue with or without Barack Obama in the fold. So I thought this was extremely important, that article. I didn't really read the whole entire article, so it's pretty lengthy, but I thought it had a lot of merit, and it might shed some light as to why some people feel a lot of disgruntledness about the Obama era. And I have to agree with some of those things that are said there. While in one sense they say he's done some things for some in terms of health care and whatnot, and some of the things, his legacy and what have you. But I'm hearing that there's been a lot of repeal with the Trump administration, and that there's some things that might be pulled apart or might not all reflect Obama. There may be some things that will be left in place, but not all. So there's a lot of disgruntledness, and uneasiness in the black community. There's the racial wealth gap. And so that has that's probably the biggest issue, if not anything else, in the black community. And that's why you see a lot of black people rushing to pull their money out of banks that are mainstream. There's some that are doing that, that feel that we want banks that represent us, that want to see our businesses grow, that want us to become homeowners, that want us to acquire property, or to have a foothold in America. It's like we're the other that's been left behind. And a lot of it is economic oppression. And so culturally, as a people, we feel like we're left out in the cold and steamrolled in a lot of ways. And what has been happening also is they put other minorities against black people that are quote unquote supposedly minorities. You know, they bring people from other groups or social groups in the forefront, and then they lump us all together as, oh, okay, they're all the minorities, you know, when they kind of sweep black people under the rug, and so to speak, politically, when it comes to financial equality. So that is where the anger comes in at, the disgruntledness. I'm explaining it in a way where maybe people can receive it in a way where it isn't, it doesn't come off as negative, because I heard the sentiment of the guy on the video. He called Obama all kinds of names, and he said that he felt like you know, they are relying on all of these guys that are coming out saying that they know all this stuff about economics and black economics and let's make things work. But be careful. See, black people are so easy to be victimized by these individuals. And a lot of them are very egotistical and self-centered and xenophobic. And what they do is they have books. They're making money. They're going to be fine. You're supporting them and their cause, but they're not really for all black people. So just be careful about who you're supporting.